This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. Welcome. We'll call this meeting of the Jefferson Common Council to order. Roll call, please.
Alder Miller.
Here.
Brando.
Here.
Mark.
Here.
John.
Here.
Charles.
Here.
Kelly.
Here.
Fire. Here. Niles. Here.
Thank you. At this time, we'll entertain public participation. Anyone would like to do so, we ask that you come up to the podium tonight. Is at your laptop up there, and please state your name and address and reason for appearing. We will be having a discussion on the former Meadow Springs property. We will not be taking any action tonight, but we will be discussing possibilities and some of the results of the due diligence that we've done to this point. So, is there anyone that would like to take the comment?
Jim Keene, 315 Brickyard Court. I got a couple of friends down here that live on Brickyard Court. We're coming down to go over some of the issues we got on the ponds back there, or the wetlands that we got in back of my house. And we'd like to talk to somebody, you people about it. We're very concerned. Some of you were down there, took a look at it, and it needs to be addressed. What's happening, all the storm water that comes out of the north up there on Fairway Circle, and now it's getting worse because now they got all them sub pumps are hooked up to the storm sewer, and it runs constantly in back of my house. And the wetlands used to be probably a 10 by 10 area. Now it's huge, and it's going to get worse because that water comes 24/7, 365 up there. And I think we need to take a look at that. A nice redetention pond back there, something that's nice looking, with a shelf on it with riffraff. All our houses are really nice. We pay a lot of bucks down there. So we like to do it. I think it would be nice if we could fix that up down there. Also, on here you got them, what do you want to call it, cul-de-sac up there. That is cool. I kind of like that. But anyway, there's a lot of issues where this other pond sits way high up in the hill. So on up there, it'd be as you look at it, would be to the east of me. That thing sits way up, and I don't understand what they're doing. But anyway, these are things that we got to talk about. But yeah, we're kind of anxious to see what we can do. It's like I said, we got to take a look and make sure we fix this thing up for us. Appreciate your efforts and time, and hope we can come to some kind of agreement that will get her done, get her started. I don't know if you'll do her this year, but I was talking to some of your people there. Maybe we put a temporary pipe in there, go through some of that brush back there. It's huge. It's just spreading out. And anyway, I hope we can take a look at her and get her fixed up for us. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else? Seeing no one, we'll move on to proposed ordinance number 5-20. An ordinance to amend section 265-4. Yeah.
Well, I would move to suspend the rules for suspension.
We've done a motion, second by Al. And discussion. Bill, you want to?
Sure, what we're referring to here is the two parking lots on city property constructed behind the new Stable Rock Stable Rock Winery and Distillery. The city purchased, built two parking lots, an upper and a lower. There's about, I believe, 20 stalls between the two parking lots. We will have an easement that will be coming forth soon to be able to access that lower one. We'll need permission from Stable Rock Winery to do so. The parking stalls themselves are all located on city property, so there'll be a public parking lot. Essentially, I've talked with PD on this as far as what we're looking at for that parking lot, and essentially, we don't want any restrictions on that parking lot with the exception of no overnight parking. So essentially what we've got on that parking lot is it's a public parking lot, no parking 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. So we would not allow any overnight parking of vehicles in those two parking lots. However, what's that?
I have to ask the question, why is that?
Essentially because of the fact that it's consistent with some of our other parking lots that we have where we don't allow overnight parking. There is
Other than snow removal, why is that? If you look at parking lot, we pave it, we stripe it, why not let people park there 24/7?
Good. Well, just one thing is there's a lot of apartments along them alleys and people will choose that to be there. You might lose half this parking lot to people living above one of the restaurants.
Well, if you're gonna park there,
The customers go by.
customers of businesses along there.
you wouldn't just say, huh?
No, I'm just saying that if the people, just thinking out loud, if the people live in apartments choose to park there, they should be there 24, 36 hours straight, you know, I don't know.
I guess you could say police officers and police officers and fire and whatever, but the point is, paving, striping, putting out a parking spot. I know a lot of people work 9 to 5 or work first shift. Usually I'm up at 2 a.m., I'm up at 5 a.m., 4 a.m., I'm up all the time, driving to town. People are active. People are moving around. People are parking. Most people are seeing downtown. Are these students go to park? Am I saying they should park on public parking, or if they can't park there, they'll park either under the bridge or on Main Street. So I don't know what our expectation is here. I'm just trying to clarify it and get it straight, because, you know, if we're gonna have these business owners, they have parking on Main Street, a lot of times, they're literally there and need parking. Just their business and where the parking spots. I don't know what these 4 hours from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. I really do for us.
Well, one thing it does is allow us time to be able to have vehicles not there overnight during the winter so that we can snowplow. There is parking underneath the bridge. That is overnight parking. So these are new spaces. So that was the reasoning. That was consistent with what I had thought about. PD agreed with it as well. And we didn't want to put in
24/7.
Yes. And we did not want to put any kind of 2-hour parking or anything like that. Because we figured that a lot of people who will be using this would probably be using it for like Stable Rock underneath that. So we didn't want to limit them to 2-hour parking in that area.
This is the key into the downtown district, and the businesses are hopefully going to improve it. The tacos are short-term.
Right.
I guess we're going to do this now, because at some point in the future, we might reconsider it again, because we're going to clean up the alley in the years to come, and we're going to encourage the business owners to improve the tacos they're building.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's, again, it should be available whenever it's needed. It's all paid by taxpayers, and those people are taxpayers too. Whether they're renting or not, the people that they're renting from are still paying taxes. So I think we should probably have it available every month.
And I'd also say that if you look at like the city center parking lot, there is a few parking stalls that allow overnight, but it's consistent. There is not overnight parking in that parking lot as well. And again, the main thing is that people that do want to frequent those businesses, the parking stalls are available to them. So.
Oh, was looking for clarification
Sure.
or explanation, so it's not.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I have one. Bill, I
rules
just
and
want
waiving the
clarification on
second
this. You said the hours were from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Is that 7 days a week?
Rich, can't hear anything you're saying. Let me see if. Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Can you hear me?
Oh, wait a minute.
Bill, can you hear me?
Gotcha. Go ahead, Rich.
Okay. My question was, I wanted some clarification. You said the hours were from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Is that 7 days a week?
I believe it is.
I was just asking because it's been a while, but the last I remember when the bars, when I used bar time on Friday and Saturday is 2:30.
This ordinance is 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. I don't believe there's anything mentioning days of the week. No, Chris is agreeing. It's not, it's just straight 2 a.m. to 6 a.m.
Okay. So if they're parked there at after 2 a.m. and they're at Vinny's Rock Bottom at 2:15, they'll probably get a ticket.
I would assume so, yes.
Okay. Are we all okay with that?
And there's also parking behind City Hall that is overnight parking as well.
All right, now I got one more note besides my own comment. Otherwise, say, I don't own a place that is open late anymore. I did previously, which is now becoming a table at home. But we use these parking tickets, people who park downtown. We have a parking lot we don't want you to use downtown, but yes, if they do stay at a downtown establishment, and perhaps they have a few years, they're likely to get ticketed on the way home. So I need to know what our justification and motivation is. Like I said, I'm not at that game because we're closed by 9 o'clock most nights. You got a family that's local crowd goes home early. Some places are open later. But if we're not gonna let people use the parking spots and we're tickets and for parking downtown, are we promoting drunk driving? Are we inhibiting drunk driving? I'm not sure what we're doing here, other than the snow removal. I definitely agree with that argument. I get that part, but I just don't know, because
What is it?
cities that post from December to March, this time period, well, maybe, I've seen that in other cities. I don't know. It used to have a busy places open late, I don't anymore, I'm happy for that. But I still care for the other business owners that might have late night traffic. I mean, they do want to be the best place to have a place to park. Or, of course, give them a safe ride home, which is what we all promote. But if we have a parking lot, we don't want parking, that should take one option away. Yeah, I'm not trying to do this.
Right now, we're just voting on, moving that second.
Okay. So we're bringing it up for discussion, so we can see that.
Are there any more comments with regards to waiving the second reading? If not, we'll call the question. All in favor of waiving the second reading, please signify by saying aye as the voting is called. No to oppose.
Randall?
I couldn't hear it.
Sorry, Bill. We're taking a vote on waiving the second reading. This is not the approval or denial of the motion.
Thank you.
If, to have a vote and waive the second reading.
Okay, thank you. Am I voting first? Aye.
Lars,
He said aye. He's got his mic muted.
Young,
Aye.
Aye.
Tully,
Aye.
Fire, Niles, Miller.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you. That's approved to waive the second reading. Now we will ask Alderwoman Niles to introduce proposed ordinance number 5-20 and to approve.
Honorable Mayor, citizens of Jefferson, members of the council. An ordinance amending section 265-4, paragraph D9 of the Jefferson Municipal Code to add an additional area forbidding parking between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Whereas the city of Jefferson has a comprehensive plan regulating when and where its citizens may park within the city. And whereas the city of Jefferson has caused to be constructed a new parking lot located adjacent to Riverside Alley in the city and known as Riverside Alley South Parking Lot, which includes an upper and lower lot. And whereas the common council has determined that it is in the best interest of the city to permit overnight parking in the aforementioned Riverside Alley South Parking Lot. Now therefore, the common council does hereby ordain as follows. Section 1, section 265-4D9 of the Jefferson Municipal Code is amended to include the Riverside Alley South parking lot, parcel number 241-061-1121-010, as an area in which no parking is allowed between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Section 2, this ordinance shall be effective on the date after its enactment and publication of this ordinance as required by law. So do I
Would you care to so move?
I would care to so move.
Okay. It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Tully. Now discussion on the concept of prohibiting parking
Maybe this would help. I
2
know
a.m. to 6 a.m. Anywhere.
my concerns out, Vinny's concerns out. So this is the south, so this would be right along the Stable Rock. And
The parking lots are treated the same.
So the north section is the same as the
The
south?
parking lot that's currently striped out there, the upper and the lower parking lot, correct.
So yeah, the new part, the new striped part, that and the lot where the substation was.
Correct.
Constructed.
Yeah, these are treated the same.
Yeah, that was my
Sure.
understanding.
So Bill, there's a total amount of, what's the total number of lots or parking spaces?
I believe it's 20 stalls.
You're not taking away any parking spaces from,
These parking stalls did not exist previously.
What are we gonna open?
We'd be looking to open it up this week. We've got some additional landscaping to complete this week. As soon as that's done, the barricades will be removed and opened. So possibly this weekend.
Do we need that easement before we parking lot?
We don't need anything on the upper. The lower, I'm going to say that we have verbal approval from the owner at this point, as long as we're working on the easement. So, yes.
I'm pretty sure he will enjoy that parking.
Yes. Right,
That should be easy.
right, exactly.
Questions or comments about the concept of restricting parking from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. in these two lots? No comments. Question, all in favor of approval? Restriction of between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Please signify by saying aye as your name is called. No if you're opposed.
Alderman Lars,
Aye.
Young, House,
Hey.
Fire, Niles,
No.
Miller,
We can't hear me again?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Aye.
Okay, it passes 5-3. And the second reading was waived, so that will go into effect immediately. Thank you for bringing all of the perspectives. Next, we'll move on to resolution number 17, tonight's consent agenda. Alderwoman Byer, please.
Honorable Mayor, council members, and citizens, City of Jefferson Resolution number 17. Be it resolved by the Common Council of the City of Jefferson, Wisconsin, that the consent agenda for July 7, 2020 is hereby adopted. Vouchers payable for June 2020 in the amount of $249.72. Payroll summary for June 19, 2020 in the amount of $186,247. Council minutes from June 15, 2020 and June 23, 2020 at the County Council. Licenses as approved by the regulatory committee. We had 3 one-year license for one for Clinton Town, Melania Lacada, and Melania Smith, all for Tuesday, and Alan Albrecht, Brooke Foley, and Mitchell Vogel for Neighbors, and Sean Mesky for Quick Trip. I will so move.
If we move, is there a second? Second by Alderman Young. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor of tonight's consent?
Alderman Young. Kraus.
Aye.
Tully.
Aye.
Fire. Aye. Niles. Miller.
Aye.
Randall.
Aye.
Lars.
Aye.
It's unanimous, thank you. Next, we'll move on to a discussion regarding the former Meadow Springs property option to purchase. Tim?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I think before we start, we have a few people that are accessing from home. And so I'll just introduce myself, Tim Freitag, City Administrator. With me discussing this project tonight is Bill Pino, our City Engineer. And the third gentleman at the table is Carl Horfmucker from Midwest Prairie, who's done some due diligence work with our Parks Department on the installation of a conservancy on the former 5 holes. So that's the panel tonight. As Dale had mentioned earlier, what we hope tonight is share with the council the due diligence that we found from our investigation over a period of a number of months. And I think sometimes that work was started and then we just had to set it aside for COVID-19 and some other things that came up, and we pick it back up. So we're not really going to ask you to take any action tonight other than to listen to the discussion, ask questions. We'll do our best to answer them. But I think we will 2 weeks from tonight at the second July council meeting ask you about whether or not you favored exercising that option. So the option that we put in place was negotiated in November of last year. It was for 9 months. It will expire in early August. So there's tonight's meeting and then there's the next one. And then it's time to let the Madison Gulf people know what the city's intentions are. So that's kind of the process over the next couple of weeks. What I will say is that the review we conducted really is of the existing conditions of the court. And then in addition, we investigated what potential alternative strategies to repurpose the golf course might be. So that's largely what we're going to cover tonight. I would say that the things we're going to discuss tonight sort of follow the outline in your packet, but we'll talk a little bit about the option agreement description. We'll talk about the conditions of the clubhouse facility. Bill will summarize a wetlands determination report. He'll also talk about soil conditions and a groundwater report. We'll talk about the suitability, in our opinion, of the property for residential development. Carl will talk a little bit about the proposed conservancy and build the trail system. We'll talk about proposed project phasing plan, as well as the estimated budget. And then we'll have some concluding remarks, and then we'll answer any questions, and then we'll go home after that. So with that, I think I'm going to get us right into a discussion of section 1. And that's really just a description of the option agreement that we put in place. So the option was put in place November 6th of 2019 between the city and Jefferson Gulf Management LLC. The agreement was for the city to be given the ability to option the property for purchase. And that property is a little over 35 total acres. It currently is divided into 3 separate tax parcels. The acquisition cost for the entire 34 plus acres, plus all the existing improvements, which would include the existing clubhouse, and then there's a maintenance shed on the southeast portion of the property, and anything else, quite frankly, that might be out there. As is condition, that would be part of the term for $225,000. Interestingly enough, the way Jefferson Gulf wanted the option structured, the $225,000 is assigned to just a portion of the property. Typically, that would be the property between the circle and Dewey. It is also the area that has the most redevelopment potential. So we would be purchasing that, and then Madison Gulf would be gifting the rest of the property to the city. And we assume that was done for some tax purpose, that they wanted the option written that way. The last thing I would mention is we have until August 6th to exercise that option, should the council choose to do so. Closing would not take place until either late January or early February 2021. And I suppose they wanted to do that to get it into their next tax year for some reason, but that was a term that they wanted. In terms of the condition of the former Meadow Springs Clubhouse building, a bunch of us have been to the building, some of us more than once, Bill, myself, the mayor, most importantly, Greg Knoll, our building and zoning administrator, and his assistant Troy have been through the building, fairly well cataloged with lots of pictures. We're not going to show any of those tonight, but it's safe to say that the building is in quite a bad state of disrepair and dilapidation. And it requires, on someone's part, pretty significant investment. The building needs a complete new roof, a new HVAC system, a complete rehabilitation of the exterior siding, windows, doors, and installation. Obviously, any repurposing of the building and would have to be, as part of the project, the building brought up to code. Obviously, a lot of that was constructed before the codes that are in place today. Visually, you can go in there and you just know there is a significant presence of mold and mildew. Obviously, at least in our opinion, we think that occurred from a roof that leaked and just wasn't repaired, right? The property's been uninhabited, vacant for not all of 10 years because there was a church tenant in there for a while, but for the better part of 10 years. So it's safe to say that it's a significant investment in the property. The property is currently zoned single-family residential, and under the current zoning, the only use by right is for a single-family home. So the pool of potential reuses of that building without a zoning change are not very great. There are some conditional uses that the City of Jefferson Plan Commission can approve that expands the pool of uses, but not greatly. I would say the best thing to expand the pool of reuses would be to rezone the property. We don't think that's very unlikely because the golf course is surrounded by residential neighborhoods. In our opinion, it would probably be really hard to rezone that to a district that allows for commercial or retail uses. It doesn't seem very practical. So the pool of users is likely pretty small on that building. Is it impossible? No. Is it likely? Probably not, that anyone's going to buy that and convert the building into a residential dwelling. The cost would be so significant, probably cheaper to build a new one. The potential conditional uses provide a little more room, but not a lot of new uses for someone to acquire the building and repurpose it for those intended uses. The building currently is legal, but it's a non-conforming structure. The conditional use permit previously issued has expired. It currently no longer exists on the property since it's been vacant for so long. What that means is that unless the building can be made conforming, investment in the building is limited to about 50% of its fair market value. So right now, we estimate, give or take, the building to be worth in its current condition about $180,000. So 50% of that, you can do the math, you aren't doing what I just described for that amount. So generally speaking, I would leave it like this. Is it possible to repurpose the building for some use? Yes. Is it likely? No. We think the building most likely is a candidate to be raised. And we'll talk about some potential reuses for that property a little while down the line. So I just want to stop before I turn it over to Bill. Any questions about either the option or the condition of the clubhouse building? I suspect I'm not telling you much that you probably didn't already think about anyway. So Bill's going to talk a little bit about the wetland determination work that he had completed on the property.
Thanks, Tim. One of the things we wanted to determine on the property is whether or not there was a likelihood of wetlands, which would obviously have a big impact on what could be developed on the property and what type of regulations we would have to work around. Back in December, we hired a company called Autumn Brook Ecology to do a wetland determination. What a wetland determination is basically a first step in the process to determine the likelihood of wetlands on the property. During that analysis, there was four areas that were potentially identified for wetlands. One larger one on the east side, on the west side where the ditch traverses the property. One on the southern area south of Fairway Circle by Rock Street, and then two on the east side just west of Dewey that obviously are the areas that we're most concerned with because those would potentially impact.
I think you have that in the appendix section.
Yeah, these are all in the appendices. So those would obviously impact the development of the property. Based on that determination, we had a formal wetland delineation, at least the field work done. At this point, that delineation has not been submitted to DNR for concurrence. That needs to be submitted on behalf of the owner. So I would just say that in the case that the city does purchase that, determined to proceed with purchasing the property, that we would look at submitting that wetland delineation on behalf of Madison Gulf so that that field work would not have to be duplicated next spring. The results of the wetland delineation is that there was 3 areas identified as wetland. That is the area that is on the west side. That's the largest wetland. And again, that extends around the existing ditch over to the west end of the property. A wetland on the southern edge of the property, which is south of Rock Street. And then a third wetland that is over on the east side of the property. And that is an area that we had originally looked at for development. So that would certainly impede development. One thing that I will say is that if you recall, we had a wetland delineation that was done last year for the North Industrial Park. For that one, we were able to do a wetland fill permit to be able to put the road around that wetland. And for roadway purposes and public purposes, a wetland fill could be done. In my experience, whenever you're doing any type of residential development, first thing DNR looks at is, can it be avoided or eliminated? And financial impacts do not impact their ability to be able to say yes. So in this case, just by saying, well, we'd like to have 20 lots instead of 19 doesn't fly with DNR. So in this case, that would impede some development in that location. I would also say that the area on the south side, that wetland, there is stormwater that drains to that location. So there is a possibility that down the line, that wetland we would look at for potentially an exemption, which if you're able to achieve a wetland exemption, then you don't have the jurisdictional requirements of a normal wetland, and you're able to fill that area or use it as additional stormwater management. So just keeping that in mind. So as of right now, we've got 3 identified wetlands on the property. And again, at this point, the city has not submitted any formal report to DNR. And depending on what the city chooses to do in the future would dictate whether or not that report will be submitted or not. The other thing I would also say is, what does a wetland actually do to a property? And essentially what it does is you're not allowed to do stormwater management or build within those wetlands, as well as a buffer outside of that wetland. Based on the quality of the wetlands, we're anticipating that the easterly west wetland that we'd be looking at not only the wetland boundary, but also likely a 10-foot buffer on the outside of that we could not develop within. So again, as you guys look at the layouts that we have laid out, it does impede some development in there, but it doesn't prohibit, it doesn't affect more than 1 lot from what we've done at this point. So the next step we also looked at is soils. The soils in this area are very consistent with what we find in Fairway Circle and also along the golf course. I don't think it surprises anybody that it is consistent with high groundwater. There's also a lot of topsoil that we found in some fill areas in that location. In some cases, we had groundwater essentially between 6 and 8 feet from the surface, which obviously a basement is 10 feet. So as far as does that prohibit development, the answer is no. Essentially, it is saying that there has to be engineering controls put in place for the lots to be developed. And that's dewatering during construction and also looking at sumps and houses that are in those areas. That depth is essentially consistent with the existing ground surface. There would need to be fill brought in certain locations to be able to get drainage out to the street. So at this point, what we've determined is that it's something that we need to be aware of, but it doesn't rule out the possibility of development. One of the recommendations from the soil study was that we do an additional analysis over on the east side of the property. We only had 2 soil borings in those areas. So what we did is had 6 monitoring wells installed in those locations to be able to determine how does groundwater fluctuate over time. And right now we're still in the middle of that process. We expect that by the next meeting, we'll have our 3rd readings out there. But that analysis is consistent with groundwater being between 6 and 8 feet. Again, we're going to take a look and see exactly how that has fluctuated over the course of a couple months. Normally, you would try to evaluate this over the course of a year. But obviously we don't have that time frame, so we're making the best decision based on the data that we have, but those monitoring wells are still there, and we can continue to evaluate those over time. So at this point, we have information on the soils, on the groundwater, and we're continuing to monitor that, but it's consistent with what was encountered around Fairway Circle on those lots as well. So we know there's a presence of groundwater, and certainly stormwater management in those areas would help alleviate any impact on those houses and adjacent development as well. Any questions on either the wetlands, soils, or groundwater at this time? Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Tim then.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to let you try to queue up, I think that's Appendix E. The section that deals with suitability for potential development. The two site plans that were in your packet are wrong. I just replaced them with the handout that just circulated. But there should be also a map of the whole development that picks up the development along the. And I think that was Appendix E as well. That's right. Okay. Yep. That's it. So I will generally say that we evaluated the property to determine if portions of the property were suitable for residential development. The evaluation considered only redevelopment options that were not in conflict with the current zoning of the property, which is residential. We also did not consider development that would somehow preclude the city from developing a conservancy on a majority of the golf course property and the associated trail system. So having said that, our review identified two potential areas of property that we think hold potential for redevelopment. Area 1 is located up in the northwest portion of the property. It's generally located near the former Meadow Springs Clubhouse. This area comprises approximately 1.6 plus or minus acres that we think could accommodate a small scale condominium duplex development. The conceptual site plan that I distributed, the first one, includes an 8-unit condominium development with each building containing 3 bedrooms, about 1,600 square feet, plus 2-car garage. The units are shown as single level with shared private drive and shared driveways. One of the things we like about this area is that it's not impacted by any of the wetlands that Bill talked about. So wetlands wouldn't inhibit the city from promoting development there, should we so choose. And also, most of the public utilities exist to the site. They're out in the streets, the very same utilities that for years served the clubhouse. So that means someone doesn't have to spend a lot of money getting services to this particular location. It's unknown whether the site would require stormwater. There's currently a lot of impervious surface. Obviously, a new development would create impervious surface. We just don't know if there has to be any additional on-site retention or detention at this property. Generally speaking, I would say that a development like this, we expect to create about $1.8 million in new tax base and generate about $43,000 to $44,000 a year in property taxes. The other handouts that I gave you, number 2, assumes that the existing clubhouse building would remain, and it would be repurposed for some use, and how that incorporates into the Conservancy area. And then the last handout that I gave you assumes that the clubhouse building would be raised in that property just incorporated into the Conservancy. The other area of development we thought had some potential really includes the property along the eastern and southeastern periphery of the property, generally located adjacent to Dewey Avenue. The concept plan that you have in your council packets, Appendix E, depicts 19 single-family lots constructed along South Dewey Avenue and a yet-to-be-constructed cul-de-sac connecting to Dewey Avenue. I think the last time we talked about this, we really thought about 20 single-family lots. We're going to lose one of those lots, more than likely to a wetland. So instead of 20, there's 19 single-family lots. The lots depicted generally are about 1/3 of an acre in size, some as much as a half acre, with street frontages of approximately 100 feet, comparable to the lots existing on Fairway Circle. I think that's what we would try to promote if we want to try development along these properties. Lots 1 through 4 are generally able to be developed with simple lateral extensions of water and sewer out to Dewey. So these lots are generally served now by city services. Lots 5 and 8, they're going to require an extension of sanitary sewer within South Dewey. And Bill, I'll let you just make a comment about that.
Sure. Currently, the utilities on Dewey extend south from the north south to East Spring Street. So that's where Tim says it's kind of the low-hanging fruit to be able to develop those northerly 4 lots. On the south side, not shown on your, I guess it is shown on the far south side, is Pondview Court. That's as far as the utilities extend to the north. So in order to serve lots 5 through 8 and the cul-de-sac, utilities for water and sewer would need to be, or for sewer would need to be extended to the north to be able to serve those 15 lots. And we'll talk about phasing here in a few minutes, but essentially, again, we would be looking at extending the sewer up, whether or not that could be potentially done behind the curb line to be able to reduce costs and replacement of the road in Dewey. We could certainly look at that as well. But then the lots extending to the west along the cul-de-sac, obviously we're talking a new road with water, sanitary, and sewer utilities in those locations.
And then finally, lots 9 through 19, that is the area that requires construction of about a 500-foot cul-de-sac, 66-foot right-of-way with full utilities. And generally speaking, we won't cover it here, but a little later, it's really expensive to install infrastructure, whether it's a street improvement or whether it's sanitary sewer, water, and stormwater and power. That's really quite expensive. And then lastly, I think I'm going to maybe turn it over to you one more time, Bill. Clearly, if the city wants to try to promote single-family residential development there, we're going to need additional stormwater management. And so, Bill, you want to make a quick comment about that?
Sure. What we're showing right now on the maps is 2 stormwater management areas, one along Dewey and then one along the southerly area. That area on the east along Dewey, it's potential that the first 4 lots could be developed without stormwater management. It's really going to be dependent on the amount of impervious area that is created to be able to do that. But essentially what we're talking about there is a stormwater detention pond, bioretention basin, something like that, that we would be able to use to be able to slow infiltration rates before those are released into the storm sewer. That area on the south, again, what we're showing is a stormwater pond. The way we're currently showing it is adjacent to that existing wetland down there. As I had indicated before, if you have an existing wetland, you can't use that wetland for stormwater management. So ideally what we'd be looking at, and I think there's a potential for a candidate of doing this, is to exempt that wetland as a stormwater management area. If we were able to achieve that, then that wetland area could actually be expanded and used for stormwater management. Where that pond is currently shown is actually takes away one lot on that cul-de-sac, so you may even gain a lot back by doing that. So right now, we just preliminarily laid out possible locations for that. We're nowhere near a final design on that stormwater management, but it certainly has to be incorporated to be able to slow those rates of stormwater flow in that area.
So lots 1 through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 19, more likely than not, would have to be constructed in multiple phases. Overall project and phasing costs are included in your appendix G. We'll talk about that a little later. And I would say conservatively, development of the property in the fashion discussed, we would think would produce about 5.7 million in new tax base, and when you do the math, it generates annually about $137,000 in property tax dollars. So actually, the next part of our discussion is the proposed Conservancy, which Carl is going to talk a little bit about, and then Bill will talk a little bit about the trail system. But what I think is really kind of unusual about this, and maybe you can elaborate, Carl, I don't really know too much about conservancies. I think you're going to school us on that. But, you know, this one potentially could have 4 different habitat types. Prairies, wetlands, savannas, open woodlands, and habitat planning, which I'm really curious about, and I really see that as something that's not only promotes diversification, it's kind of downright interesting, I think, as an opportunity. So please.
All right, thanks. I'm Carl Korfmacher, and my business is in Edgerton. It's called Midwest Prairies, and contacted by Cindy Keller last year to take a look at this and kind of get a preliminary review. And the goals that I understood we were talking about included converting the existing grass that was the golf course hole to native vegetation to improve the habitat value and possibly educational value, and make it more beautiful too, more attractive. And also to keep in mind that we want to not make the maintenance too hard, so minimize the maintenance cost. So the preliminary design would include converting all that existing turf grass to native habitat, which would be a lot of prairie, some areas that are wetlands that would be enhanced. Some of them are already in pretty nice shape. There's some existing woodlands that can be enhanced, and a savanna is really just a kind of a prairie with some trees in it. It's usually a bur oak, the common savanna tree. It's one of the most endangered ecosystems on the planet, so it's really kind of a neat opportunity to bring some of that back. It was the dominant ecosystem here historically before settlement. You talk about the habitat plantings. We have a lot of existing trees, and generally trees, especially coniferous trees, do not play well with prairies. So some of them would have to be removed, but in other cases, we could take and create a grouping of trees and shrubs. I call them habitat plantings. There would be a mass of trees and shrubs. And the reason you do that is the easiest way to maintain a site like this is with prescribed fire, and those habitat plantings would be excluded from burning. Whereas if you have pine trees, evergreen trees in a prairie, they will not tolerate fire at all, so they'll look terrible and probably die eventually. Just as a reference, there's a couple of projects regionally that might be comparable to this. The one that is probably the most comparable is in East Troy. If you're going on Highway 20 out of town towards the interstate, the McDonald's is there in East Troy. And just north of that, there's a subdivision, and there's two pretty large open spaces, prairie and woodland open spaces that we've worked on for the city of East Troy the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And they're really nice. They're surrounded by houses, and we do prescribed burning there. We do some invasive plant removal, and they've got one area that was a big oak grove that was full of buckthorn and other invasives, and we removed all that. And it's a really nice place. So prescribed burning we do there every couple of years, and that would be the program here. I think you'd probably be doing a portion of it as a prescribed burn every year, so you'd be on about a 3-year rotation. Some people get a little worried about that from a safety standpoint. It's really very safe. I've never heard of one getting away and damaging properties. When we do it, we conduct it with a crew of 5 people, well-trained, water on site, and if the city's involved, they might want to have a fire truck there just to be sure. But we've never had a fire get away, and I only know of one instance in the last 20 years of a fire like that causing getting away, and that one didn't cause damage. So it is the cheapest and easiest way and the healthiest way to manage native planting like that. The process to get from where we are now to a nice, healthy native prairie wetland complex is a multi-year process. And the first couple of years, it looks terrible, and it has to be endured. There's really no way about it. Prairie plants are conservative, slow-growing, long-lived plants. You plant a seed of corn and it's 6 feet tall in a couple of weeks, and a prairie plant will grow 6 inches in a year, and then next year it'll be 12 inches. And some of those plants take 5 or 6 years before they'll bloom, before the flowers will bloom. So it takes time. You have to kill everything with herbicide to start with, and do some cultivation and tillage. So the first 2 years it looks pretty rough. The third year you start to get some flowers blooming, so you start to have hope. And then after that it gets better every year. The cool thing about a place like this that we're talking about, and as Tim said, we could have woodland and open woods, savannas, prairies, and wetlands. We could have 200 species of plants, native plants growing here probably in all those different ecosystems. And it's constantly changing. So people that walk through there on the trails that have been proposed would be seeing something different every week almost. Different plants are blooming. It's changing with the seasons. And even as the years go and we have wet years like the last couple of years and dry years, the plant communities will change and adapt to the weather. So it's a really dynamic place compared to a lawn. And with prescribed burning and perhaps some modest invasive weed control from time to time, you should have a property that's pretty easy to maintain. They're kind of bowl shaped, and I was just about to call them a basin, not really an appropriate term in East Troy. We burn those every second or third year. We go through there, spray some weeds, maybe every couple of years. We did that big removal of buckthorn a few years ago, and pretty straightforward. It's not probably as nice as it could be. They could probably put a little more effort into it than they have, but it's still pretty nice, and people utilize it all the time. Anything?
Anyone have any comment or question for Carl?
On a contractual basis, and the original development would be something that your company or consulting firm would employ, or you just providing a plan, and we would have to do it or contract out to.
We're capable of doing all of it, pretty much.
As well as the maintenance, like the burning and so forth.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I mean, and just as a reference, we're working on the 10 Chimneys property right now. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. A lot of people have, but it's a really cool property, and it's going to be amazing when we're done. We're also working for Jefferson County at the Garmin Nature Preserve in Waterloo. That's a really neat park that sits on a drumlin, and there's some Indian mounds up on top, and it was just chock full of invasives, and we're doing a multi-year project of removing the invasives and reestablishing prescribed fire. So those are a couple properties locally that if someone was really interested, they could go check out. East Troy would be a good one to look at, although I'll say that I think we can do better than that. And the last thing I'll mention is that often prairies include very tall grasses, and I would not propose that for this site. I don't think 8-foot tall grasses would be appropriate at the scale that we're working, and might even provide some security concerns for people. So we would be using shorter plants. Most of them might get waist high or a little bit taller, but for the most part, you'd be able to see over the plants.
What plants, how do you, I mean, what plants are you choosing?
Well, I guess I pick them based on experience of what works well, and we're talking about native plants that are going to be available from nurseries. Agricole is a nursery I usually buy from. They're not too far from here, and they've got several hundred species of native plants they propagate and produce seed for. So it would be based on the soils, the hydrology, and then the different zones. We talk about wetlands and prairies and woodlands, the different species. But that's a real big cost driver. The number of flowers that you pick, you know, it could be $700 an acre, could be $7,000 an acre, but 7,000 is probably really stretching it. But you could certainly spend 2,000 an acre and have a really nice planting. But the flowers are really the driver. So we would be, if the budget precludes us doing the whole thing with a rich mix, we might pick locations that are more public and more likely to be seen and viewed by people, that we put a richer mix in, and maybe it's not quite as rich in other places. So it'd be all designed pretty specifically when we get down to that. Yeah, there'd probably be anywhere from 20 to 50 flowers, blooming flowers, for instance, in the prairie part. And there would be something blooming all year long. It would be spring, summer, fall. Mm-hmm.
It was mentioned that your company planning to use the summer. Is that what we're thinking? Because excluding the burning part, because obviously I don't see our park and rec people out there doing burning, but is that what we're planning? Are we budgeting for someone else to be maintaining, or are we planning our own park and rec department to do that? And then the question is, will we keep adding parks and adding parks and adding parks? Are we adding staff? I mean, this is a big property to take care of.
Well, the fast answer to your question is certainly the green buffer area between the Conservancy and property owners is 10 feet. We're going to be mowing that. Generally, I think our crews would do the general maintenance. We may hire someone like Carl's company to come out and do the controlled burning. I'm not sure about that. Obviously, if there's an invasive species that takes hold 3 or 4 or 5 years down the line, that may be a little above our pay grade, and so we may need to ask a professional. But by and large, we want to develop something that is relatively maintenance-free, that is really not significantly impactful on our existing workforce. I mean, that would be the plan if we do it. Well, I think so. Yeah.
Like I said, in East Troy, I don't think the city does anything. We'll probably shift a little bit. You know, I think you could get away with not doing anything. And there's probably a handful of weeds that can be easily identified, and we could train someone that if you just stayed on top of it. You had one person at the city who knew how to identify the weeds, and they could go through and check for them, you know, before it becomes a problem. on a consistent basis, I think you'd probably get rid of about 90% of the problems before they become problems. So I thought Cindy said that your city staff had done some prescribed burning.
I think they have, just not a lot of it.
Not a lot of it. So, I mean, they like doing it, and it's in the spring when sometimes it's hard to have other things to do. In April usually is when it's done. So it could be done by city properly trained. Yeah, okay.
My concern was that we are able to maintain it within our own, with our own budget.
Yeah.
We have to hire somebody else.
Right.
They need to be every year to come in.
Yeah, I don't see it in the cards for the city to be able to make a big expenditure to maintain this thing. We're gonna design it right, I would hope, where there's really low maintenance. And, you know, as I say, you gotta take care of those buffer areas. You know, we want those to be nice. But by and large, I think this is a low maintenance impact.
I'll just clarify that doing this type of project is different from like a building project in that it's a multi-year project for us. And we call that phase from the start to when it's mature establishment maintenance. So the maintenance tasks are different than we would probably be doing. And there's some mowing and possibly herbiciding, depending on what comes up. You really only have to worry about Canada thistle, wild parsnip, maybe poison ivy, a few things that like that. But the prairie will outcompete most of the other weeds, especially the like the dandelions or ragweed and stuff like that. The prairie will outcompete that eventually, and won't be able to grow.
Oh, what's the
It'll all compete that too. You're talking about garlic mustard, as well, there's the yellow one, right? Yellow rocket, some people call that's a mustard too. And then there's a garlic mustard, which has a white flower, it's in the woods. And that one, as long as, so if we were doing some of the work in the woods to clean that up, if you, A, get some sunlight on the ground, and B, plant some other plants that can compete with it, you can eliminate that and not have to keep pulling it forever like some people do. I know people that have pulled it for 20 years and never gotten it. No, we can avoid that.
Water issues over there, there's too much water and too much spring.
So the prairie vegetation will do a better job than the current lawn turf grasses. Prairie vegetation, the roots will go down to the water line and won't usually grow below the water line, but they'll, in some soils, they'll grow 30 feet deep, whereas turf grass is usually just a couple inches. So it'll help to an extent. It'll definitely be drier than it is now, at least on the surface. Yeah. You don't have to fertilize it, and really just once it's established, it's burning and picking up any weeds before they become a problem.
So, Bill, before we move on, do you want to comment on the trail?
Sure. Obviously, one of the things we've talked about with this is obviously access to the property. So what we currently are showing right now is about a 6,000 foot trail system that runs through the property. Basically runs around the entire property. This would be behind the areas that we'd be looking at developing between Fairway Circle, Fairway Lane. The exact length of the trail isn't necessarily determined at this point, but on average, this would be similar in a look to what we have as far as the bimodal trail by the Fisher Preserve, an 8 to 10 foot paved trail that basically runs through that area. I would also say that in order to do that, we would have one wetland that we would have to cross. So right now we're anticipating that we would have a wetland fill permit less than 10,000 square feet to be able to put the trail system across that wetland area and build that. On average, these trail systems are built at about $60 a linear foot, which gets pretty costly. But we'd also look at alternatives with the public works crew to be able to do a portion of the work, to be able to save some costs there. But as far as the permitting itself, we can handle all that. And we really don't anticipate any issues with being able to get access through there. We would anticipate that even the access points would be kind of phased. Right now, we're showing an access point on the proposed cul-de-sac. Obviously, that would come later when the cul-de-sac's actually constructed. But we'd still look at some type of trailhead parking up by the existing or by the existing clubhouse, and then a couple access points off of Dewey. So this would be a public trail accessible to anyone. And certainly I think it would be very reflective of what we're trying to do here in the city of Jefferson, going outside, promoting the outdoors, and obviously the things we're talking about with the beauty of the flowers through there, being able to access those points without necessarily interfering with the residences along those locations. Yeah.
Are you planning any lighting on the trail?
At this point, we haven't determined, we haven't gotten that far or anything like that. So I couldn't tell you at this point.
I think probably unlikely. I think that trail or that park or that Conservancy, it would close at dusk. I don't think there would be a plan to light it unless there's some concern that comes up. Bill, do you want to take us through what you think is a reasonable phasing plan for the project?
Sure. One of the exhibits that you guys have there, let me get to it here on this drawing here. As far as what we're looking at for the phasing, we would anticipate that the trail system would be, if the property was purchased January 2021 or somewhere around there, the first year would be a lot of work out there. We would anticipate that we would try to grade for the path, install that path. We'd also look at the platting of those lots. More than likely what we do is probably plat all of the lots, or possibly carve them out as CSMs to be able to but obviously with the intention of developing those first 4 lots along Dewey first, needing just laterals in those. We would also, in the case that the option was chosen to redevelop the area of the clubhouse, we look at raising that facility. That would require abatement and then raising more than likely through the city fire department to be able to do that. And then obviously start the Conservancy as far as what would actually get done that first year with the Conservancy. Obviously, Carl could comment on that. And then as far as the second or third phase, you'd be looking at the lots, either the 5 through 9 or the cul-de-sac area. And it's possible the stormwater management areas may not be needed until like the second phase, depending on how those first lots were developed. So, you know, what we're showing in here is, you know, a 3+ year phasing, but I think you'd see some significant improvement within that first year of what we'd be looking at. And obviously, right now, Madison Golf still maintains that property. Once the property is purchased, then the maintenance falls back to the city as far as mowing the grass and things like that. So obviously, the sooner the phasing could be addressed on those areas, the better for all that live in those areas.
All right, I promise you we're in the home stretch here. So kind of the last thing we're going to talk about is what we think is, you know, a general accurate proposed budget for this project. That is in the report. It looks like this. Section 8, generally speaking, my comment is, I think, you know, if the city wants to do this, it really needs to look at it as a benefit cost project rather than a cost benefit project, because even if it sold all those lots at a price that we generally think we could sell them at, you know, there's not enough to recover the cost of acquiring and then improving the property. You know, a benefit cost, not a cost benefit way to look at it. So I guess I can take them through this. The initial purchase price is $2.25. I would say that money has been set aside for this project. It exists. If we had to close tomorrow, we could, and if we don't buy it, that money will be used for some other project. Once purchased, the path installation estimated at about $200,000. If you did it all, that's a mile plus of path around the property. Planting, $20,000. Engineering and putting water and sanitary sewer on lots 1 and 4 is estimated at $70,000. Development of the Conservancy of about $125,000, and raising after abatement the clubhouse about 40. That is generally in that first phase. Whether that would all take place in 1 year or over 2, I don't know. And then the improvement to lots 5 and 8, shown as phase 2, and then phase 3, a fairly significant investment is $700,000 for construction of that cul-de-sac along with the utility extensions. And then in the right-hand column, you can see what the potential revenue recapture from the sale of lot or the clubhouse area should the city want to develop that area. And then I think just our quick concluding remarks. I would have to say it is a pretty unique opportunity to be able to acquire pretty affordably. It's an attractive price anyway you slice it. But to acquire 34 acres of really undeveloped green space near the city center, the heart of the city, that's a pretty rare thing. Not many communities really are afforded with that opportunity. Generally, I think the other thing one should ask themselves, what the heck is going to happen? We were shocked when we talked to the Madison Gulf people, and they never planned for this property, which basically tells me at some time they're going to get sick of paying whatever bills they're paying. They're going to walk away. Then there's a tax delinquency in the county foreclosed. And if you think it's maintained poorly now, wait till that happens. It'll really be bad. And so I think, the city never quite gets to walk away in those things. It's going to deal with that property for years, whether we're the owner or not. And then I think it's an opportunity to take an underutilized piece of property and really make a recreational asset that I'd like to think generations of Jeffersonians would use. Now, having said that, if you want to do it, some things to keep in mind. Some of the problems you heard tonight, the city gets to inherit those problems if we buy it. And the one that Mr. Keene talked about, that's just one of a long list of property maintenance issues that residents out there have told us about. That's going to be ours to undertake to correct some of those things. Just to review real quickly, we have until approximately the first part of August to exercise that option. I think we've told you, we think the clubhouse facility has little current value in its dilapidated condition, and we think it's a tear down. There is some limited redevelopment potential in the 2 areas. I actually think this is going to be an investment on the part of the community. So not only does it have to be good for the neighborhood, it's got to be good for the community, right? I like the option to establish some tax base, even though I know some of the adjacent neighbors might not like that option. I think that's the one that probably benefits the community the most. But that's for you to sort out and to think about. there will be some impact on soil and groundwater created, I think. So what does that really mean? The thing that it really means to me, if we redevelop that area along Dewey, that's pretty low in there. You know, you're bringing in some fill to elevate the site, but if you do, it might be such that somebody that builds a home with a basement may not even have a groundwater impact if they're elevated high enough. That can certainly be done in our opinion. And I think what Carl just said, I think a conservancy and a trail network, I think that's a pretty practical reuse of a golf course property that has really other limited uses. So I think, you know, with that, we'll end our discussion. We'll answer any questions that you might have. And if you want to go home, I wouldn't blame you. And we can pick up the discussion in 2 weeks. So I'll kick it back to you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any members of the council have any questions or comments at this point?
You'd be a great asset to the community. It's an opportunity to take, when you're on high maintenance grass property, at least at the onset. And do something great and grab to the forest, which is where I live, had a great deal. Now, again, we're showing a 3-year plan here. We're upside down from the beginning. Long term in like a 5, 10, or 15-year plan that we built out. So when do you think that return on investment to break even?
I think Vinny, yeah, certainly. Oh, certainly.
10 years?
I think it depends how quickly the market can absorb those lots and you can have taxable improvements. But oh yeah, I think over time, there's no question. There's recovery.
Overall, in favor of the plan. Just don't want to get a burden on the taxpayers. But again, it is right in the heart of the city. And I think it would be great to see what we see in conceptual drawings and the ideas of discussed and so forth. I think it would be good.
Anyone else? Bill or Rich?
Well, I have another question. So those improvements to the area that you saw at the and as you said again, I think it could be smelly. Those improvements be anywhere in any of the phases. And that we want to ensure significant making changes to that. Do you have any kind of budget or a plan, or do you know what that's going to cost before we start this?
Well, the improvements that we're talking about there are, we've got stormwater management areas shown adjacent to that existing wetland. So what I had indicated is that if the city acquired that, one of the things we'd be looking at is trying to exempt that wetland from a wetland status so that it could be maintained properly as a stormwater management area. So it is incorporated in there in the budgets that we're showing there. And obviously part of that is a permitting process, which is a timely process to be able to determine whether or not that area is exempt. I think a lot of the areas that we're looking at out here, you know, we've heard from residents along Fairway Circle, we've heard from Jim on those areas. And I think that a lot of these areas became issues after the golf course stopped operating. When these areas were being maintained on a regular basis, I don't think the majority of these issues existed. So from that standpoint, I believe some of this is a maintenance issue. And the areas that we've looked at that are imminent danger to properties, such as the trees falling, have been addressed by the city. So these other issues are associated with the lack of maintenance on the property. So when it comes to stormwater management, you know, the area that's back behind Jim, it's an area that's growing up with large canopy trees. It holds a lot of moisture. When those areas were being maintained, they weren't necessarily issues because water was flowing through there at that point. So these are all issues that can be addressed through maintenance, and it'll be things that we look at down the road should the city look at purchasing this property.
I got a question. Tim had mentioned that if we purchased the property, that we would inherit the issues like with the Jimmy Keene area. If we don't purchase the property, who's responsible for taking care of it if Madison's not going to take care of it?
I would tell you, Rich, my own feeling in dealing with properties like this, not necessarily here, the city never gets to walk away because the city's going to take the complaints from property owners when they have no one else to go to. So
Right.
we don't ever quite get to walk away. What would be true, we don't own the property, quite honestly, but we're going to hear about those complaints and we don't quite get to walk away. So, and as I say, if the property ultimately would go into foreclosure, I would generally say if it's maintained poorly now, wait till that would happen.
Right.
And these probably multiply, quite honestly, in my opinion. So I hope I answered your question.
Just a statement. Whatever little problems we're talking about, maybe some of them aren't so little, but this is one of the most unique opportunities I think any community's ever had. Right in the middle of Jefferson, 34 acres of land. There just isn't that possibility. I don't think any community I can think of. So I think this is just a wonderful opportunity for us. It's going to cost some money, although the front money isn't. I mean, $225,000 for 34 acres of land is a bargain, no matter how you look at it. I just think it's such a wonderful thing, and I certainly look forward to the development of this property and look forward to the building of the walk paths and the gardens. And it makes Jefferson a truly unique place, and I think we'd be foolish to pass up the opportunity.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, and I'll shut up then.
Any other comments or questions from the council? Okay. Public here tonight that would like to ask a question, we're off a brief comment.
One quick question, when you said it's not maintained, you think it's not maintained well now, this place? What are they doing to maintain it? What does Madison at all besides small?
For those that are online, the question was, what's being done right now by Madison Golf to maintain it? Basically, they're on a mowing schedule. Madison Golf has a private contractor that mows the grass. I think they're on about a 3-week cycle. I would say that last year, I got a lot of calls. I've gotten less calls this year, so that tells me that they're doing a little bit better job out there. There are some areas out there that are quite wet that have not allowed them to be able to get any access to even mow those areas, mainly between Fairway Circle and Fairway Lane. But essentially at this point, it's a mowing schedule. No.
I got one question. Sharon was next, please.
I think here, what's the first tax income that we're getting from these 35 acres of Madison Golf?
I have to tell you, it's not very much. Not very much. I don't have it right at the top of my head. I'd be glad to get it for you. Yeah, and I have that number in my mind, and it can't come to me right now.
Acquiring 35 acres for $250,000. Now we're talking about 6,000 acres. Does that have an impact on the taxable value of other lots in the city when you do your assessment?
Well, I would generally say what I would expect. I would expect that it would preserve property values rather than erode them. I don't think with the improvement we're talking that you're going to see a significant appreciation in property values. I think it protects the further eroding of property values. And I think there probably has been some that have probably went down since the courts closed in 2010. I'm talking about, what I was talking about, if there are new improvements developed on some of the developable portions of the property. I wasn't talking about existing property values. I was talking about new tax base created through the construction of new home sites.
Correct. And when you look at the creation of new taxable property, you're affecting the undeveloped, already existing property in the community, right? So right now, if you own an acre of property in Jefferson, depending on where it's located, between 24 and 35,000, right? But you're going to create the acre value to 6,000. So when you do your tax assessment across the community, that $6,000 acre that you just created is going to increase the value of the other undeveloped land in the community. That's a short term, but it does have an economic impact.
I don't think our appraiser will take this. This is a fire sale.
Okay,
They wouldn't,
that's what my question.
they wouldn't take it into.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And really, those are applied against comparable properties. It's hard to fathom there would be a comparable property in the city to this one. So this isn't going to be viewed the same as a 1 acre lot that got sewer and water on the frontage of it. That makes sense? Okay. Jim?
That property that I got down there where the water comes down, that a lot of that was created by the city. Years ago, no one stuff on it, come off Fairway Circle. They had them hooked in the back, they never ran into a storm, so we ran out through the back. 10, 12 years ago, they hooked them up to stormwater, sump pump to stormwater. Now when back in my house, it's only running when it rains out to catch basin. We got water now coming 24/7, 365. It's really got to be a nuisance, and some of you have seen that, all the water coming out there, it's just spreading. Them wetlands years ago, when Town and Country put it in, there were a couple of cattails back there, maybe 15, 20, or probably an area of 10 by 10. Now it's huge, because all that water is running there and it's creating a big swamp. And that's so close to my lot line in Austin. I never used to be like this. There's, I'm really worried about me. I'm going to sell my house. I want to get the heck out of it. Not because I'm selling the AD, so I'm going to build a new one. But I'm going to tell you that we got to get city fixed up. I'm sorry. I've been telling you nothing when I go back. When you first came here, I go back to that 6-inch pipe that was from the back of my house over to the daily unit was in Willer. We had a 6-inch, now we got a 24-inch pipe taking that water out of the back of my line. There's a lot of water comes down from the new, what do you want to call it, cul-de-sac. All that water gets about 10 feet, maybe even higher. From the bottom of that hill, top of that hill, down to that 24-inch pipe. All that water is coming every year. I mean, we got to do something. I hope you guys find it. Like I said, if it's up to management golf, it'll never get done. And I'll be probably dead before I leave. But we need to take a look at this guy, and I think it's a very serious issue. For me, it's a very serious. All these people around here, it's a very serious issue. We got to clean it up. And I'm hoping you guys buy it, start on the because it's a nuisance. And that's all. We used to know that, and beautiful land. I never golfed there, so I wouldn't know because that Kelly's house, that used to be one time was a green. Now it's a tee box, and it was beautiful. And now it's gotten all that crap growing up down there. It wasn't possibly maintained. So I'm hoping you guys find it and fix it up. It could be beautiful back there. It's a nice pond back there. I got a well back in my house. Don't want to eat, want to do. But it used to irrigate the other night. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else? Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you for coming tonight. You are more than welcome to come back in 2 weeks. It is expected that we will be taking some action on this one way or the other 2 weeks from tonight. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Carl, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate you. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Voice vote. All voice vote.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Michelle, Rich, thank you.